from the Schoening Center on the Arizona Western College campus in Yuma. This is the U.S. Senate Arizona Rural Issues Debate.
Hello, I'm Lou Gum of KAWC, Colorado River Public Media. On behalf of KAWC, KECY Television, and the Yuma Sun, welcome to the U.S. Senate Arizona Rural Issues Debate from the campus of Arizona Western College here in Yuma, Arizona. Today we'll hear from Arizona's Democratic and Republican candidates for the United States Senate, Dr. Richard Carmona and Congressman Jeff Flake. We'll begin with 90-second opening statements, and then candidates will take questions from a panel of local journalists on issues related to life outside of the state's metropolitan areas. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question and 30 seconds of rebuttal time. Candidates will also have 90 seconds for a closing statement. Built into the schedule is an additional 4 minutes. Should the moderator or panelists wish to ask a follow-up, they can extend discussion by 1 minute should they choose to do so. On our panel today is KECY News Director and Evening Anchor Anna Chalk, Yuma Sun reporter Joyce Lobeck, and KAWC Morning Edition host and reporter Michelle Faust. Joining us today are over 300 residents, close to anyway, from the Yuma area, southwestern Arizona. They have agreed to respect the candidates and listen silently during the debate, with exception of right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to Yuma Congressman Jeff Flake and Dr. Richard Carmona, candidates for the United States Senate. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming to Yuma for this debate. Let's get started with opening statements. We flipped a coin. Going first is Dr. Carmona.
Thanks so much. A pleasure to be with you today, Dr. Maley and the Arizona Western College community. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you and welcoming us. I'm not a politician, nor do I aspire to become a chronic politician like some. When asked to run by my fellow doctors, soldiers, and others I work with, my first response was, sure, I'll run. I'm running as far away from Washington as I can, because I know how broken it is and how dysfunctional it is, having been there as Surgeon General of the United States. But when I realized that really is the reason that I need to step up and run again, because if my grandmother, my abuelita, and my mom were still alive, they'd be pretty disappointed if I didn't accept the responsibility. This is my first campaign. This is my first series of debates. I'm still learning the process. I'm running because I benefited from this American infrastructure of opportunity. Starting out as a poor Hispanic kid of immigrant parents, I experienced hunger, homelessness, dropped out of high school, and the only thing before me was uncertainty. But I was able to become a United States Army Special Forces soldier, get a GED, lucky enough to get into a junior college that had an open enrollment program for combat veterans. Use my GI Bill to become a doctor, a cop, a professor, and in one generation, become Surgeon General of the United States. I'm running to ensure that all kids can attain the American dream just as I did. Thank you.
Congressman Flake, and a reminder that the clock's right down here in front of you.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Thank Dr. Maley, Lou, and all the community here at Arizona Western College. Appreciate this opportunity. You know, just 2 weeks ago, my wife and I received a wonderful call, the best call parents can get. It was our oldest son informing us that we are grandparents for the first time. Aiden Jeffrey Flake was born into a wonderful family in the greatest country in the world, but he was also born into $50,000 of debt. That's his share of the federal debt, the $16 trillion federal debt that all of us collectively hold. That is a transcendent issue of our time. That is generational theft to put that kind of burden on kids and grandkids. We need somebody for the Senate who's willing to stand up to either party, whoever is in charge, against this overspending. That's been my record in the House. That's the record I plan to take to the Senate. That's why the state's largest newspaper, after meeting with both of us, endorsed my candidacy. They know I'll stand up. We're here today debating Arizona issues. That's important because this seat is currently held by Senator Kyle, who has made that his focus. All those issues that come as a consequence of Arizona being 85% publicly owned, water settlements, forest health policy, all these things are important, and we need to make sure that whoever has this seat understands them and will advocate for them. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Let's begin the questions portion of the debate. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond and then 30 seconds each for rebuttal after. The first question is to Congressman Flake. It comes from KAWC News Director Anna Chalk.
First of all, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Carmona and Congressman Flake. We're going to begin with water allocation. Water allocation has not been legislated by the federal government in more than 50 years. Since that time, populations of states sharing rights to the Colorado River have changed drastically, as you know. Arizona already uses 99% of its allocation and has promised more water to at least 2 Indian reservations in the northern part of the state. What do you plan to do to ensure Arizona's water rights are protected while minimizing the environmental effects?
Thank you. That's an important question for the state. Senator Kyle, as I mentioned, has been the one that's negotiated a lot of the Indian water settlements that we've done. We just have the Navajo-Hopi settlement still to do. The allocation is always going to be an issue. That's why it's important to have people in the Senate who understand this issue and are willing to advocate for the state. You know, just sitting to our west is California with a 53-member delegation. Ours is just 11. So you've got to fight hard. You've got to make sure that our water doesn't go there. Also here in Yuma, there are always concerns that it will be allocated within the state and that Maricopa County and the urban areas will get water that's intended here. My promise to you and everyone here is to ensure that we make sure that allocation comes here to Yuma and elsewhere, and that when there are changes, those are deliberate and with stakeholders involved all the way through. Water is the lifeblood of Arizona, and we've got to make sure that it remains and that we have allocations that are reflected by both population but also by agriculture and some of the traditional uses in Arizona. So thank you for the question.
Dr. Carmona, 90 seconds.
Thanks. Well, this is a great question to start on because Congressman Flake and I do agree on issues like water as it relates to ensuring that we don't cede water to anybody else and somebody does stand up and fight for our water supply. But where we do disagree is where Congressman Flake wants to mine for uranium in the Grand Canyon watershed, which has the potential for contaminating our water and putting 25 million people at risk who use that water every day. There's no monetary benefit to the state when we do that because of the laws of mining. We won't be able to get anything there. And I'm kind of surprised that he would risk putting 25 million people at risk by potentially contaminating their water. And we know that this is true. So I'm real concerned, Congressman, that you would jeopardize 25 million people in the water here by really aggressively trying to move legislation to allow uranium mining in the watershed area when we know that it would be deleterious potentially to people here. And it's not just me. The Arizona Republic, the Arizona Daily Star, the Sun actually in Las Vegas said your actions were shameless and irresponsible. And I think that's something you need to deal with.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm concerned that my opponent does not seem to understand Arizona geography. We're talking about mining in the Arizona Strip, not the Grand Canyon. What I'm trying to do is protect the carefully constructed agreement, bipartisan agreement, called the Arizona Wilderness Act, that was actually negotiated by Barry Goldwater on one side, Mo Udall on the other, the Sierra Club on one side, the Chamber of Commerce on the other, that protected the Grand Canyon, but also recognized we would need economic activity in the Arizona Strip. That's what I'm trying to protect.
Dr. Carmona, final 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. I do understand the geography, and apparently there's a difference of opinion, but what we are talking about is the aquifer. We're actually talking about the watershed area that extends far beyond the canyon. So any mining you do there is potentially deleterious because it can contaminate the aquifer that leads into the Colorado River that ultimately brings water down. So I was very careful to say this is Grand Canyon watershed risk. And it's a risk to all of us because 25 million people rely on that aquifer and that watershed to provide water for this area, as well as California and other areas.
Thank you, Doctor. We're going to get a quick look at a lot of topics now. Next question is from Yuma Sun's Joyce Lobeck.
High unemployment remains a stubborn and key concern around the U.S., hitting the rural areas of Arizona particularly hard. Yuma County consistently is the model for unemployment, vying with Imperial County for the highest rate in the nation month after month, with 25% to 30% of its workforce looking for jobs. What ideas do you have for improving the economy and creating jobs, in particular for rural areas? Would this be a top priority for you?
Yes, thanks for the question. It is a very big priority, top priority for me. First and foremost, we have to do something about reforming our tax structure. The tax code is killing small business. Small businesses are being taxed at 35%, and that is just not sustainable in this environment today. We have to change the loopholes at the top, because big companies like GE and others pay no taxes, and our small companies pay up to 35%. We need to make it fair for everybody. It needs to be transparent, that people understand. So first and foremost, we have to create an environment that our small businesses can thrive. Second, when we look at the uniqueness on the border that's different from the tax reform that's needed for the whole nation, when we look at the border, we need comprehensive immigration reform. As I travel the border and I meet with the agricultural folks and the ranchers, we have a workforce problem because of our immigration system is broken, the visa system is broken, we can't get workers to go back and forth, it takes hours to come back and forth. These problems create an impediment to commerce. So we have to be able to provide a workforce that can move back and forth very easily. And right now we're not able to do that because of all of the impediments that are there by not having an effective, comprehensive immigration policy. So that becomes an economic issue as well, because the workers here who want to work, there's not enough of them. The workers that came from across the border to take care of our ranches and take care of the agricultural industry, they can't get back and forth like they want to. And the ranchers and the agricultural industry are telling us every day, we desperately need immigration solved because it's an economic problem. It's not just an immigration problem. Thank you.
Congressman.
Thank you. You've posed a great question here. Unemployment around the country is at an unacceptable level of about 8%. It's remained so for about 43 months in a row with this administration and this democratically controlled Senate. In Yuma, it's anywhere between 18% and 30%, depending on which gauge you use. That is completely unacceptable. One, we've got to have some kind of certainty on tax rates moving ahead. Second, it's the certainty of regulation that is really stifling. And you see it here. We've had the federal agencies, whether it's environmental regulation, healthcare regulation, labor regulation, financial regulation, it's all consuming. And then, one of the biggest job killers out there is the president's health care plan. I just spoke to a small businessman this morning from Yuma. He has 44 employees. He's planning on hiring 4 more, and that's it. Do you know why? If he gets to 50 employees, then he starts getting fined for not providing the health care insurance that the president and others think that he ought to provide. That means fewer jobs. He said, I'll simply pay overtime and make them work Saturdays because I can't hit 50. You've seen the same thing happening with small businesses, franchises, fast food restaurants. They're moving people from full-time to part-time because they don't want to hit that threshold. That is a huge job killer, and we have to repeal it. That's a commitment I will make to you. When I get to the Senate, I will vote to repeal the president's health care plan. My opponent will not.
Dr. Carmona, 30 seconds, please.
Thanks, appreciate it. First and foremost, I think you can see the partisanship by which Congressman Flake comes to this issue. On any issue, it's always blaming the other side. And that's the problem we have in Congress today. It's broken. Congress isn't working because it's so polar, people can't have a rational discussion. The Congressman brings up health care. The fact is, we're spending 18% of our GDP today on health care. When I look at the health care plan before us, I've been critical of it as well. We need a better business plan. But the Congressman's plan is to rescind it, and then we still have 50 million people without insurance. We're going to have more of those people coming into the market. It's going to be transferred to all of you who are going to pick up that cost for the people who don't have insurance. So we can't do that. That's not a plan. That really is just hurting us because the public then will be shouldering this burden and the doctors and the hospitals will pick up more uncompensated care. That doesn't work as a plan, Congressman.
Congressman, take about 45 seconds since he went a little over there.
You bet. You bet. We have got to repeal the president's health care plan. The president promised when this health care plan was passed that it would lower premiums by about $2,500 per family. It's raised premiums by about $2,500 per family. What's in the future? Not just for those who pay premiums, but but also those taxpayers at the state level. When that burden comes here, the problems that our state has had with the budget will be multiplied. We can't go that direction. We desperately need health care reform, but we can't go the direction of the President's health care plan.
I wonder if I'm just going to take another minute on this topic and ask you both, starting with you, Dr. Carmona. Should you be elected, would you be willing to put the weight of your office behind finding out what the causes are and the solutions to the high unemployment here in Yuma County?
Most definitely I would be able to do that, and I would be looking forward to doing that. But I want to just finish addressing the issue on health care because it really does play into unemployment as well. Congressman Flake's plan is really not a plan. All it does is to transfer risk to the community. Whether it's a block grant or a voucher, the fact is that we the people are still going to shoulder that burden. Hospitals and doctors will get more uncompensated care. They're not addressing, and that's why I say both parties have gotten it wrong, because they're not addressing the cost of care. The cost of care comes from 75 cents of every dollar being spent on chronic diseases, most of which are preventable.
And I'm going to stop you there because I want to stay on unemployment. Congressman, same question to you. Would you be willing to put the weight of your office behind finding the causes and solutions to unemployment here in Yuma County? One of the things that Joyce brings up is that the word traditional has been applied to high unemployment in Yuma County. That's not a compliment.
No, it's not. Some of the issues have to do with what the issue that was raised here with regard to being near the border, seasonal work that comes on, and being especially susceptible to national trends when it comes to unemployment and the economy. We need some things desperately here in Yuma, like a commuter plan that will make it easier for labor to come across in the daytime and go back at night. That's not really allowed easily in our system. But Yuma also, one thing we have to avoid is the sequestration that is looming at the end of the year that will hurt, first and foremost, our military readiness. But for an area like Yuma that relies heavily on the defense industry, it would be devastating. We've got to make sure that we rationally look at that issue. So those are two. But then also, I have to say, with things like the President's health care plan, that just means fewer jobs, not more. So it is important. That's what we've got to look at among the uncertainty on taxes and the certainty of regulation that's coming down.
And I know we'll hear more on these topics, but let's move on to our next question. It comes from KAWC's on Michelle Faust. And I'm sorry, it goes to Congressman Flake.
Okay, Congressman Flake, access to health care in rural Arizona can be very difficult, and many of the problems include a lack of health care providers, state and federal funding cuts, access and the loss of many facilities. Additionally, when patients cannot pay, there's further financial loss to the institutions. For example, our local hospital lost $40 million this year alone from unpaid treatments that contributed to the layoffs of 135 employees. Do you have a plan to help improve the health services available to patients in rural Arizona, where we have very unique financial and logistical challenges?
Right. Thank you. I grew up in Snowflake in rural Arizona. I know the issues. I know my parents and the difficulty they have at times, particularly for those who are on Medicare, to find doctors willing to treat them. And that's going to become exacerbated as we go forward with the President's health care plan as well. But let me take another issue you mentioned, uncompensated care. You really feel it here on the border. I've toured the hospital here. I know the issues that are faced with federal rules like EMTALA, where you're required to treat anybody that comes. That just means that unless the federal government reimburses, then the hospital has to do it and the taxpayers here. And that's unfair. That's why we in the Congress, the delegation has worked hard to make sure that SCAP funding and hospital funding and reimbursements are there when it's something that Yuma can't control. The border is a federal responsibility, but the costs are borne by the broader community, not just health care, education, criminal justice costs, incarceration. Those things are borne disproportionately by Arizonans and by the border communities. And so, yes, we need a plan to deal with that, but it has to start with the federal government doing what it has to do. If they impose mandates, those mandates need to be funded. And then, obviously, with the President's health care plan, it will exacerbate the problem we have with access to doctors in rural areas.
Dr. Carmona, 90 seconds.
Thank you. The Congressman said he's come down to the border and he visited a hospital. I've worked here for over a quarter century in hospitals, run a healthcare system. I've been a police officer on the border, working with ICE, working with the Border Patrol. I've been a registered nurse. I've been a physician's assistant. My whole life has been about caring for others. And ultimately, I became the doctor of the nation, the Surgeon General of the United States. So these are issues I don't have to visit. I've lived them every single day of my life, right up to the cabinet level and dealing with this with our secretaries and the president. I know the issues along the border and how difficult they are. This is not simply an issue of getting more doctors. We have to revamp our whole healthcare system. The congressman, again, he's stuck on this soundbite from his party that you have to rescind Affordable Care Act. Governor Romney himself said, you know, there's some good stuff in here. These pre-existing conditions, we should allow that to be. And kids covered to 26, oh yeah, that's good too. And if your kids are like mine, you want to cover to 26 because they keep coming home, okay? And we look at our seniors and the donut hole, Medicare Part D. Even Governor Romney, running for president, said we should retain these. So the ACA has good things in it, but it needs a better business plan. And part of what we have to recognize is that it's not all about doctors. This is a multidisciplinary team that needs to be put together in communities to deal with doctors, with nurses, with assistants. We have to reform this system to one that approaches optimal care and wellness rather than waiting for people to get sick. Simply doing what the congressman wants to rescind ACA and go back to the same thing, we're going to incur a whole lot of debt and more problems because people will continue to get sick.
Congressman, your response to that, 30 seconds.
Yes. Thank you. With regard to coming here on the border, I'm here quite a bit. I've worked with this community, with local law enforcement. In fact, I'm very proud to have the endorsement of Democrat Sheriff Ralph Ogden, who knows this issue of the border and issue with working with the federal government very well. I've worked with him. I'm proud to have his support. If I wasn't down here working these issues, I certainly wouldn't have his support. But with regard to the hospitals again and patient care and access to doctors, whether we like it or not, the President's health care plan is an impediment to better access.
Dr. Carmona, last 30 seconds.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Again, the congressman thinks that by just rescinding the plan that this is going to correct the problem. It isn't, because that's why I say both parties have gotten it wrong. They're not addressing the issues that are clearly germane to the rising cost of health care. This is not just a health issue. It's killing our small businesses. It's making it very difficult for people to get insurance. We need a new system. We need to address the incremental variables that contribute to the cost of health care. Simply rescinding this doesn't do it. Congressman mentions he has endorsements. Look, I'm a police officer half my life. Most of the national police organizations, the Arizona Police Association, as well as the National Association of Police Organizations, of which I was chosen national top cop, they all endorse me as well. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about solving problems.
All right, we need to move on to question 4, and it's coming to Dr. Carmona from Anna Chalk.
The amount of money the state spends on each student in Arizona is it's around $1,300. That's the nation's second lowest. Nearly half of all students who attend rural schools in Arizona live in poverty. The outcome for these students is bleak. Fewer than 7 in 10 students will graduate, inevitably perpetuating that cycle of poverty. Additionally, funding for schools is tied to property taxes, which means that schools in rural areas will continually get less money. How do you plan to legislate our state's education budget to ensure that those students in rural areas are funded more fairly?
It's a great question. In fact, I was just speaking with Dr. Maley when we started on this very issue, because I'm a product of a community college. I couldn't get into college because I was a high school dropout coming back from combat. But somebody had the wisdom to say, let's give these kids coming back from combat an opportunity. So I got an open enrollment program in a community college. And I had a GI Bill to give me some money so I could get educated. So I know the value of community colleges, and I know what they bring to the community. We have to restructure how we invest in our communities. What we need to do is, we have so much problems with unemployment, with small businesses struggling. We need an economic base that can allow the schools to thrive. And so comprehensive tax reform is the way we have to start there. We have to create incentives within the community so that people that are innovators, entrepreneurs, want to come here. This is a beautiful state. But when people want to move and bring their businesses and hire people, which generates the higher tax base that you're alluding to, they ask, how about your school system? Oh, it's not doing so well. How about your healthcare system? How about the arts? How about theater? How about activities? How about extracurricular activities? We need to build an infrastructure of opportunity that makes this the most attractive place in the nation to stay. We look at our energy resources. We could be the solar capital of the world. Right now, we need coal. Coal is 30% of what our energy is coming from. But the long-term plan is we can actually do a lot of things. Look at all the solar panels we have out here in the demonstration project. This is where we're going in the long run. There's things we can do to generate more revenue and a stronger tax base to be able to support our community colleges, which we must do.
And Congressman, rural students in Arizona.
Thank you. I believe that the numbers you cite refer to K-12 education. Is that correct? K-12 education, gratefully, is a function of state government and not the federal government, gratefully. The federal government provides about 8% of the funding that goes into local schools. With that 8% comes about 60 or 70% of the mandates and stipulations and paperwork that tie the hands of our local schools, teachers, and administrators. So with regard to what the federal government should do, your question is very relevant with regard to rural schools. Part of the problems rural schools are having is what's the future of some of these big units like the Navajo Generating Station or the Cholla Power Plant or the Coronado Power Plant, which the EPA is really trying to shut down. You want to affect local schools, allow the EPA to move ahead and impose restrictions that will force those power plants to shut down. I can tell you it is devastation in a local community. We've seen that happen in my hometown of Snowflake. We have a paper mill that shut down that would still be up and running, helping us actually manage the forest and to manage the Apache Sitgraves forest, but it can't anymore because the EPA has taken us out of the forest completely. That devastates a community. And so we've got to make sure that economic development can come, and there's a large impediment right now with some of the federal agencies because Arizona is...
Congressman Flake has been there in office for a dozen years. They only have the authorities that are bestowed upon them by Congress. And I agree with him. Arizona is different. We can't apply general EPA regulations. We can't regulate dust. This is Arizona, okay? But it's Congress who has the authority to hold them accountable.
Congressman Flake.
Yes, I have to answer that. You're right, that's Congress's role, but for the past 3.5 years, we've been unable to exercise that role. And here's why. The Senate, under Democratic control, under Harry Reid's control, has not passed a budget. When the Senate doesn't pass a budget, we don't go through regular order, passing appropriation bills one by one. When we do go through regular order, it allows me to work with the Democrats, with Ed Pastor, Raul Grijalva, or others from Arizona to actually rein these agencies in. But when the Senate won't pass a budget, we can't do that. We lose our power in the Congress. That's why the Senate needs to change leadership.
And moving on to, again, a quick look at a lot of issues. Joyce Lubeck has the next question. It's for Congressman Flake.
Both of you have touched on the subject of my next question, but I'd like to go into it in more depth. Farm groups for years have stressed the need for a more viable guest worker program to provide the labor force they need to produce their crops. In Yuma County, the lettuce capital of the world, farmers for some time have advocated for a commuter guest worker program that would allow people who live in Mexico to cross the border each morning to work in the Yuma's fields and then return home at night. Is immigration reform, in particular fixing the guest worker program, something you support? And if so, what features would you consider critical?
Congressman Flake.
I think they said Congressman Flake.
No, it's Congressman
Yes.
Flake. It's to you. 90
Oh,
seconds.
thank you. We do need to revamp it. Certainly, we need a better H-2A program, also a better H-2B program for non-agricultural workers, but let's stick to agricultural workers now. We simply don't have a program that's robust enough to take care of the needs that we have. Otherwise, we'll be shipping jobs to Mexico or elsewhere, farm jobs. Here and in the Imperial Valley in California, for example, they're simply saying, we don't have the workforce, and I believe them. And here in Yuma specifically, the H-2A program is ill-suited for this community because a lot of people who live in Mexico can come and work and then return home. But the H-2A program requires that housing and transportation be provided by the employer. That simply doesn't make sense. We need a commuter program that allows people to come here and move back. That's why the Farm Bureau hasn't really supported the ag worker bill that is a pretty good fix for the H-2A program, but it doesn't address the commuter program that will benefit Yuma. My commitment is to work on those issues in a way that will give access to labor that we need to keep these jobs here in America and not ship them elsewhere.
Dr. Carmona, 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, again, Congressman Flake and I agree that a lot of the policies, procedures are antiquated, but this question lends itself to one of my earlier answers. We need comprehensive immigration reform, which includes visas, day worker programs that don't impede commerce but actually enhance commerce. The border needs to be secure, there's no question about it, but we can't let it be an impediment to commerce since so many of our jobs on this side and the other side count on that, and we have to be able to enhance commerce. So we're in agreement on those issues. But again, Congressman's been there a dozen years. Whether it's the EPA and blaming the Democrats on the other side because they didn't regulate appropriately or they're to blame and only the Republicans are going to have the right answer, it doesn't make any sense. The system is broken. Both sides are getting it wrong on a lot of these issues because each side digs their heels in and we don't get anything done. So whether it's the immigration reform, whether it's specifics of visa moving across the border, we have to stop this polarization and start solving problems. That's why people are so fed up. That's why Congress's rating is as low as it's ever been, because they're fed up with both Democrats and Republicans. They want people to solve their problems, and that's not happening.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Outlining the problem is correct, but I can tell you my record in Congress has been one to reach across the aisle. I've worked on comprehensive immigration reform ever since I got to Congress. I worked with Luis Gutierrez. I worked with Senator Kennedy. We tried to get comprehensive reform through. Unfortunately, we can't get the trust level until we have a secure border. But on other issues as well, I've been able to pass more floor amendments than any of my Democrat or Republican colleagues over the past 4 years because I reach across the aisle and work with the other side. That's what we need in the Senate.
Final 30 seconds.
Yeah, the congressman talks about his bipartisanship, but the fact is that's not true. He votes with his party more than Michelle Bachmann does. And the fact is that when he talks about Congressman Gutierrez about immigration, I called Congressman Gutierrez, spoke to him, and his words were, Congressman Flake abandoned me on immigration. When it was convenient, he was with me. When he wanted to be a senator, he left. So I think those comments are just very disingenuous. And the other issue is, in order to do the job as a congressman, you have to show up at work. If you look at 12 years of Congressman Flake's attendance in committees and subcommittees, about 1,300 that are listed, he's missed 800 of them. You can't do the job if you're not at work. If any of us had missed 2/3 of our work, we'd be fired.
Let's give the congressman about 30 seconds to respond to that.
I need to. My opponent has brought this up before, and it's simply not true. It's just completely not true. In terms of the attendance record, I think he's trying to cover for something that we pointed out, that Dr. Carmona did not vote in the 2010 elections, in the general or the primary. The Pima County Recorder's Office does not show him having voted. If you're going to ask for people's vote for the U.S. Senate, it helps to have voted in the last election. And so that's just not true. I can tell you, I do work across the aisle. The problem on immigration reform, when the president proposed immigration reform now, he won't propose a temporary or guest worker plan. It's not comprehensive anymore for the president.
All right, let's move on. Next question is for Dr. Carmona from Michelle Faust of KAWC.
The border between Arizona and Mexico is host to 6 ports of entry. Customs and Border Protection officers are charged with preventing the movement of prohibited commercial products, pests, illegal migrants, illicit drugs, weapons, and potential threats to national security. All of these things they must do without unduly slowing legitimate traffic, including more than $20 billion of imports and exports each year, and that's in Arizona alone. What can the federal government do to help small border communities plan and execute improvements to the infrastructure leading to and including the U.S. ports of entry? And what role, if any, should the government have in expediting and helping improvements to infrastructure on the Mexican side of the border?
Well, I'll start with the last part. Thanks for the question, Michelle. I think clearly we have to, in partnership with our counterparts in Mexico, have that discussion as to what the relationship is on the other side so that we can actually be able to integrate our resources. When I was Surgeon General, I spent a lot of time working internationally on our national preparedness plans, including some of the national security issues along the border. And it's really about striking a balance between the both. Now, when we look at our border, the border becomes an issue because of national security, but it's also this wonderful thoroughfare for commerce that you point out. And if we look at the blue and green uniforms, that is the immigration folks as well as the Border Patrol there, we have to find a balance. This is a portal for commerce as well as keeping ourselves healthy and safe and secure. If we look at the amount of people coming across, which is a net decrease now for a whole lot of reasons in this state, including some of the more painful, vitriolic expressions of some people who have alienated people who don't want to come here anymore, including tourists. We need more help on the border. We need to use technology a lot more so that we can move trucks and people back and forth. There's ways by using advanced technology to identify people quickly, and that is a federal opportunity because the border is a federal responsibility. We can't go along in this piecemeal, Band-Aid fashion with a broken immigration program and not have comprehensive immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform is about economics that you're talking about. It's about making our border more secure. It's about facilitating the passage of goods and people on a regular basis so that they can work here and go home, and we profit. We all profit from that. So the federal government does have an important role.
Congressman, infrastructure along the border.
Yes, thank you. We have gratefully better infrastructure over the past couple of years. The Mariposa port of entry in Nogales has seen infrastructure improvements up to about almost $500 million. The difficulty we're having now, more than anything, is getting appropriate staffing for those ports, and that's been incredibly frustrating for those of us in Congress. We haven't been able to get the administration to actually propose a staffing model to tell us how much money we need to authorize and then appropriate for these ports. And in fact, in this last go-around, I actually passed an amendment in the House to dock the Secretary's office by $50,000, just a token amount, just to try to force them to come with a staffing model, because we've been begging them for a couple of years now to tell us what we need to appropriately staff those ports. It's about $7 million that comes to our state from people crossing from Mexico and spending money just in retail shops. The fresh produce industry is about a $20 billion industry that comes mostly through Nogales, some here in Yuma or San Luis. So it's incredibly important for the state that we not just have enough green uniforms on the border to make sure it's secure, but blue uniforms to make sure that these ports are adequately staffed.
Dr. Carmona, 30 seconds.
Okay, thanks. Congressman Flake and I think, are in agreement on staffing. I really feel that we have to enhance our use of higher technology so that we can increase the movement back and forth. But we also, again, I want to go back to comprehensive immigration reform. Part of the burden that we have on this side is the apprehension and incarceration of folks who then get deported. It's killing us. So without comprehensive immigration reform, we're still going to have an economic burden. We're still going to have impedance to flow across the borders back and forth. I think the crux of all of this is about actively pursuing comprehensive immigration reform and stop the problem that has been perpetuated by Congress failing to act.
And Congressman, final 30 seconds.
Well, I think that's it. We've got to make sure that we get these appropriately staffed. Comprehensive immigration reform is desperately needed. But first, we've got to ensure that the Tucson sector looks more like the Yuma sector in terms of operational control. There's been wonderful cooperation here between local law enforcement and the federal government in making this border here, the 88 miles of this sector, secure. But we've got to do the same in Tucson, and then we can move on to all the thorny issues that are needed there, including guest worker plans and making sure we have access to labor.
And I appreciate you both sticking to the clock closely. We've only got three questions to go. The next question is for Congressman Flake. It's from Anna Chalk of KAWC.
Proposition 120, as you know, calls to change the Constitution and declare state sovereignty. If Proposition 120 does pass and federal and state courts uphold its constitutionality, what do you plan to do to ensure the state is reaping the financial benefits of acquiring the land while not compromising the environment?
Thank you. I've not studied this proposition carefully, or this proposal, but I'm very skeptical of its outlook. Other states have talked about doing this kind of thing, to having more influence over their federal lands, and I think that it's going to require more than a proposition at the state level. What we do desperately need, though, is better cooperation between the state and the federal government to manage the federal lands that we have. Right now, we have wonderful national parks here in this state, but we have a backlog in terms of maintenance, and we aren't doing that. We have the largest ponderosa pine stand in the world, but it won't remain so if we keep having these catastrophic fires. We've had 2 once-in-a-lifetime fires in just 10 years. And unless we're able to go in and manage our forests and work cooperatively with the Forest Service and other agencies of government, then our forests are going to go up in smoke. We've got to make sure that we have rational policy with regard to mining interests as well. We don't have that now. We don't have the federal government moving ahead and allowing us, for example, to do a simple land transfer to allow Resolution Copper to expand and create more than 3,000 jobs. These kind of things need cooperation between the federal government and the state, and we just haven't had that.
Dr. Carmona, we're talking Prop 120, but it does have implications for the management of public lands here in the state
Yes, it
of
does.
Arizona.
First and foremost, let's not forget, we're the United States of America. I mean, I agree with the Congressman here. This is kind of silly to talk about partially seceding from the Union. I mean, we're the United States. And so that doesn't make any sense to just drop out because you disagree with somebody. You know, our strength is the amalgamation of 50 states that share resources, an interstate highway system, commerce, departments of education, interior, even EPA. We got to keep them in check, though. We're not going to regulate dust, obviously. So the things that the congressmen have brought up are absolutely important. We need more cooperation, but that's the inherent problem we have with Congress today. There is no cooperation. It's along party lines. All we do is bicker and fight and point fingers at each other, and the job doesn't get done. It's about time that the public speaks up. Again, I'll go back to the fact that 90% of the public are disheartened with how they've been represented. We have to start solving these problems. They're not beyond our reach. The challenge really is getting Congress to start cooperating and stop this bickering on both sides.
Congressman Flake, 30 seconds.
Thank you. And part of reining in the federal agencies and working with the federal government cooperatively has to start with the Senate passing a budget. And like I say, I can't overemphasize the importance of that. Most people just look at the fiscal aspects, and those are very important. But the real effect is that without a Senate budget, the House and Senate don't go through regular order, and we aren't able to work cooperatively across the aisle. On many of these issues, I cooperate with my Democratic colleagues, particularly on those Arizona-specific issues. But when we pass amendments, we know that the Senate won't take them up because they haven't passed a budget and will just do one bill at the end of the year with everything thrown in. That has to stop.
Dr. Carmona, final 30 seconds.
Well, again, I'll go back to what I said is, Congress is the inherent problem here. The congressman blames the other side as if all good solutions only come from one party. I've seen, as Surgeon General, both sides, I often said, got it wrong, whether it's in health care or anything else. The congressman chooses to blame the other side. There's much more that we can be doing cooperatively. The congressman has taken positions that are ideologically driven in his party. He's attached himself to Congressman Aiken. He's been a proponent of redefining rape as legitimate rape. I mean, these are things that we need to be talking about. The American public is concerned about. Health care for women, our veterans, and our seniors who are being put at risk.
I need to cut you off just for the interest of time, but I do think that the congressman should get a chance to respond to that. Could you take just a few seconds?
You bet. We're here to talk about Arizona issues, and we're going off there. Let me tell you, I am willing to work with the other side and challenge my own party when needed. When we had the whole earmark problem for years, I went to the House floor and challenged my own party more than anybody because my own party was in charge. They weren't doing the right thing. I was actually removed from one of my committees as punishment for what they called bad behavior. That was standing up to my own party on these issues. So I do work with the other side, and we have to have the other side willing to pass a budget. Right now, that's the problem. We in the Senate, our House, are passing budget. The Senate is not.
Let's move on to Joyce Lobeck, who has a question for Dr. Carmona.
Passed every 5 years, the Farm Bill sets national agriculture, nutrition, conservation, and forestry policy. Due to congressional inaction, the last Farm Bill expired in September. While food stamps, crop insurance, and commodity support will continue to receive funding in the interim, there is no support for the lower-profile programs that drive innovation, create jobs, and support the next generation of farmers critical to rural areas such as Yuma County, where agriculture drives more than half the economy. If elected, would you consider a new Farm Bill a priority? Why or why not? And what changes to the legislation would you like to advocate?
Thank you. When I'm elected, most definitely will be a priority for me because I realize how antiquated the Farm Bill is, and I also see how it represents a broken Congress, once again, that failed to act. They forget that we have a big agricultural community here that desperately needs the support to be able to do its job. It's about an infrastructure for our agricultural community. That's what we're talking about. So having those supports in place, having a updated, if you will, farm bill that addresses these issues, but also a farm bill that addresses health, because the farm bill is inextricably tied to health as well. As we look at the food that the people eat, and you tie that to the obesity epidemic, for instance, in our country, sometimes we're the ones contributing to the problem because of some deleterious policy. So we have to look at that very critically and say, how do we ensure that there's an infrastructure of opportunity here for our agricultural community? How do we ensure that tariffs, how do we ensure that trade and trade imbalances are all dealt with, and that we appropriately support our farmers who are struggling every day here along the border?
Congressman Flake,
Thank you.
90 seconds.
I think you probably want some specifics here. One, we do need to redo the Farm Bill in ways that will give farmers some certainty moving ahead, but it needs to be changed and revamped considerably. For a community like this that farms mostly fresh vegetables, you get very little from the Farm Bill. It's all in just the 5 top commodities. And let me tell you how out of whack it is right now. When the Farm Bill was last reauthorized, many of us says the way we're subsidizing cotton is wrong. We can't do that. The Brazilians will certainly sue us, and they will win. And then they can impose tariffs and everything else. Well, guess what? They did. The Brazilians sued us. So now, instead of changing the way we subsidize cotton farmers, we're actually paying $150 million a year to Brazil to subsidize their cotton so that we won't have to change the way we provide subsidies here. That is wrong. That is out of whack. So is a program of direct subsidies, direct payments, where we give farmers money whether they grow crops or not. That is out of whack, and gratefully, that seems to be changing. I am proud to have worked for years on trying to get rid of the ethanol subsidy that we have, about $6 billion of a tax credit for something that just is not working and it actually is a detriment to our environment as well. That has gone now, and that's a good thing, but we need to do much more.
Dr. Carmona, 30 seconds, so maybe on some of those specifics.
Yeah, as I said in my remarks, and the Congressman expanded, I think we're both in agreement here that much is to be done with reforming our Farm Bill and ensuring that it is contemporary in thought and nature and how it's expressed to support the farmers in our area. Again, the challenge is we have a broken Congress. Why wasn't this done? And we've been kicking the can down the road for years. Both parties have been derelict in their duty, and each party blames the other person. Fact is, this is not that difficult to deal with. When we know the issues, we know the issues about tariffs and subsidies and all that. We have to have reasonable people sit down and start solving these problems. And that's the politics that's killing us now. It's the gridlock because of party politics that's not letting us solve these problems.
Congressman, final 30 seconds.
Yes, Congress is certainly dysfunctional. The figures that say that not only 90% say that Congress isn't doing a good job, I'd like to meet that other 10% who thinks that Congress is doing a good job, because I have a thing to tell them. The Congress, particularly right now the Senate, that hasn't passed a budget in 1,200 days is dysfunctional, and it has to change. But it's not enough to just say we need to all work together. We do, but you have to have specifics, and you have to have knowledge of how these programs work in order to sit down with the other side and actually come to a rational agreement.
And we've reached the final question. It comes from KAWC's Michelle Faust. It will be directed to Congressman Flake.
Congressman Flake, we've covered several issues that are very relevant to rural areas in Arizona. If you were elected to U.S. Senate, which of these issues would you be able to tell rural Arizonans that you've championed for them when you if you were to run for re-election in 2018?
Great, thank you. I'll mention a couple. First, I mentioned our problem with forest health and the fact that our ponderosa pine forest is going up in smoke. Myself and Senator Kyle, Senator McCain, and others have worked over the past several years on what's called the 4-Fry initiative. The 4 meaning the 4 forests, Kaibab, Coconino, Apache Sitgraves, and Tonto. This allows us to have industry in the forest on a commercial basis that helps us thin the forest where needed, that will help save these forests from environmental disaster when another fire comes. We've just let out the first contract to a group called Pioneer. They're going to start actually moving in deep into the forest, not just around the communities. That's desperately needed. That's something that we've done over the past couple of years. On the power generation issues, I can tell you, if the EPA is successful, if the Obama administration is successful in shutting down the Navajo generating station, that will be devastating for the entire state. Power and water rates will spike everywhere. That's something that we're fighting. In fact, when the EPA just said the other day that they're not just looking at NGS, they're looking at Cholla and Coronado and Apache as well, I immediately got a letter together and had every member of the Arizona delegation sign it within a day, including all the Democrats and all the Republicans, to tell the EPA, slow down, let's have some public comment, let's have some more hearings. We're working on those issues, and we've got to continue to, but you've got to be able to work with the other side on these issues, and that's what I have the ability to do.
Dr. Carmona, 90 seconds, please.
Would you repeat the question, please, Michelle?
So we've covered several issues relevant to rural Arizona. Which, if you were to win this election, which would you say to rural Arizonans that you've championed for them if you run for re-election?
I think first and foremost, it's jobs and the economy. We're desperate here. We have 30% unemployment rate, and there's a lot we can do that we've already mentioned already about creating an environment that's conducive to attracting business here, let our small business grow. It includes tax reform, closing the loopholes at the top, helping the small businesses, keeping taxes low for Arizona families. And it also includes immigration reform, because as I pointed out in some of my answers already, this is an economic issue as well. So when we look at the border as an economic corridor as well, and the relationships that have to transpire between Mexico and us, and the immigration issue, and national security, we have to be able to enhance commerce while we improve security. We have to be able to inspire small and large businesses to come here because it's such a wonderful place to live. We have to be able to create an environment through research and development tax credits, giving people opportunity to come here. There are plenty of entrepreneurs and business people who would put their capital at risk if they felt this was a secure environment, that the water was secure, that sanitation was good, that the schools were better than they are. And because it's about moving a family here or families to build those businesses. So I think that's most important to Arizona, is that we get our fiscal house in order, we have jobs for everybody, we change the climate we have, but you can't do that without comprehensive tax reform and comprehensive changes along our border, which includes securing the border, but also being much more innovative with visas, work permits, and pathway to citizenship. And don't forget the Dreamers. They need to be included in that too with the DREAM Act.
Congressman, take another 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. With regard to jobs and the economy, what we need is a change from the current course that this administration and this Senate has put us on. It's a course that had higher taxes, more regulation, assuming that we can just redistribute the same pie that we have rather than growing that pie. We need a change, particularly in rural Arizona. We are disproportionately in rural Arizona affected when the federal government overregulates, particularly with all the public lands. And so it affects these communities, and we see it. We have to have somebody who is willing to go back to Washington and advocate and stand firm on these issues. That's what I plan to do.
And final 30 seconds, Dr. Carmona.
The question of overregulation, I think, is one we've heard several times today, and clearly the EPA in trying to regulate dust or haze doesn't make much sense. What we've learned is that one size doesn't fit all. Arizona is unique. It has unique needs, and it has unique regulatory opportunities. But it goes back to Congress. Congress gives the authority to the EPA to regulate. Simply blaming the EPA because Congress failed to do its duty really is disingenuous to me. EPA cannot work without authorization by the federal government. And I'm in agreement with the Congressman. We have to put that in check so that it doesn't impede our economy, whether it's coal or anything else like dust that they're trying to regulate.
Okay, we've done it. We got through all of the questions. I can't believe it went so quickly. We've reached the closing statements. Dr. Carmona, your closing statement is first. You have 90 seconds, sir.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I guess I'll state the obvious. I'm not a politician. I'm not running to get reelected or to keep a party in power. And I'm not looking for a new career. I know that our collective future depends on reasonable Republicans and Democrats who act as statesmen, embrace civility, and solve our problems. A functioning democracy requires compromise. We haven't seen that for a while. I'm running to restore trust in government to the American people so as to ensure that every kid can attain their American dream as I did. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I ask for your support and vote so I may have the privilege to represent you as the next United States Senator from Arizona. Thank you.
Congressman Flake, final thought.
Thank you. I was glad to talk about Arizona issues here today. I'm a fifth-generation Arizonan, raised in rural Arizona. I know these issues. I've lived them. I know what communities struggle with when the federal government is overbearing. That has to change. The course that we're on right now, we need to work together desperately. The problem is the Congress can't unless we have a Senate that functions. When the Senate doesn't pass a budget, again, it doesn't allow the Congress to regulate the EPA, to tell them what they can and can't regulate. So that has to change. We have to have a change in course. It isn't enough just to say that you agree with your opponent. You've got to have a position on these issues and advocate for them and go to Washington standing for something. Because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything that Harry Reid puts on your lap. And that's what we've had lately in Washington. And when the budget isn't passed, both sides can't work together. My history in Washington has been of reaching across the aisle, fighting my own party when needed, making sure that we compromise when required and when needed. Barry Goldwater once said, "Politics is nothing more than public business. Sometimes you make the best of a mixed bargain." We all know that that's needed. We have to have people with the temperament and the ability and knowledge to do so. I ask for your vote. I will value it, and I'll never forget where I came from.
And that wraps up the U.S. Senate Arizona Rural Issues debate from the campus of Arizona Western College here in Yuma, Arizona. My thanks to you, Dr. Carmona. My thanks to you, Congressman Flake. Thank you to Anna, Michelle, and Joyce. And thank you to the audience for being so respectful. That wraps it up. Good night. Have a good day.